What if I told you that you can infinitely recharge your Warframe shields and armor strip entire rooms full of enemies without using any Warframe skills, without spending energy, and you can do it on any Warframe all the time? Exactly. Let's talk about one of the most overlooked weapons in the game, the Rakta Dark Dagger. Big shoutouts to all the generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on, and now, let's jump right into it. Now, first of all, the Rakta Dark Dagger isn't necessarily a new guest on the channel. I've talked about it before in some Warframe build guides, but I thought because of the fact that it's such an insane spike in damage and power for pretty much any account out there, it does deserve its own video where we can go over all its nice features in just one comprehensive guide. So let's first of all talk about what the Rakta Dark Dagger even is and why it is so special. Now, with this lovely thing being a melee weapon, of course the first question we usually ask would be, which stance should we use? And here I have some good news for you. Even though there are 3 options out there, it doesn't really matter. Theoretically, if you wanted to min-max the absolute most out of it, you would go for Pointed Wind because it is the fastest attacking stance out of the 3, but the difference is very negligible, so if you don't have that, it's no problem, just use whatever you like. Let's also take a look at the stats where, at first glance, this right here doesn't look all too amazing. I mean, we only have 12% crit chance with a below average 1.8 times multiplier, which is not a good look in terms of damage output. However, we do have 30% status chance, and as you're gonna see in a minute, this is very helpful. In terms of the damage itself, nothing really special, it's not all that high, but we do have innate radiation, which is gonna come in very handy when talking about the Rakta Dark Dagger special skill. However, before we do that, let's also quickly go over where you can get this bad boy in case you don't have it already, and that is also quite simple. Being a Syndicate weapon, you can get it from the Red Veil Syndicate as soon as you've reached the max rank 5 there. However, in case you're, just like me, not on good terms with Red Veil, then luckily this weapon is tradable, so you could buy it for Platinum. Looking at Warframe Market, it's not gonna break the bank. But now, with the basics out of the way, let's go over what makes this admittedly very average looking dagger all so special. But okay, fun time over, why are we even talking about this weapon? The reason for that is that the Rakta Dark Dagger has a special passive ability that no other melee in the game has. This one is called Mind Haze, and what it does is that 5% of the damage that you deal to enemies which are affected by radiation is going to be converted into shields for you. You can essentially shield leech enemies. Or in other words, to make a very simple example, if you have an enemy that is affected by radiation and you deal 100 damage to them with the Rakta Dark Dagger, then that means you will gain 5 shields from that hit. This, by the way, now also shows why it is so good that the Rakta Dark Dagger does have innate radiation damage, because that means the prerequisite for the shield leech, that being that the enemy has radiation on them, can be fulfilled by the RDD itself and doesn't need any external radiation priming. But okay, while shield leeching is all nice and well, you might be asking yourself, isn't it a little bit inconvenient to constantly have to attack enemies with this dagger just to get a little bit of shields back? Like, wouldn't that basically keep you busy 100% of the time and prevent you from actually doing the mission? Well, on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, there kinda sorta is a fix for that problem, and that is gas damage. See, the thing is, the special effect says you get shields worth 5% of the damage that your dagger deals. However, it doesn't say that this is only limited to the direct damage that you deal to the enemy that you're actively hitting, and in fact, this shield leech effect takes place on every single enemy that takes damage that in some way originated from your dagger. What I mean here is, if we use some element that deals damage over time, then you will get the shield not only on the hit, but also on every subsequent damage over time tick that has been dealt by your dagger. And the ideal element to use here would be gas, because when you deal a gas status effect, that creates a gas cloud in place that can hit not only one enemy, but every enemy that runs into it. Now, if you think that is all too nice to be true and there must be a catch somewhere, then unfortunately you are correct. Because while all that shield leech works very well, there is one big exception, and that is you can only regain shields with this dagger in this way as long as your shields are active. Or in other words, if your shields completely break and you get into your shield gating time interval, the shield leech from the Rakta Dark Dagger will be paused until you have regained at least one shield point. This admittedly is quite unfortunate because it means you cannot infinitely shield gate on just the Rakta Dark Dagger alone, but don't worry, I'm gonna give you some tricks on how you might be able to fix that later in the video. And as always, if you could maybe drop the video a little like, that would be very helpful with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. And now that we know how the shield regaining works, let's talk about the next big point, that being the armor strip. Alright, as we just learned, we can use the Rakta Dark Dagger to spawn gas clouds, and then the damage over time from that gas cloud is continuously gonna recharge our shield. However, these gas clouds can not only restore shields, they can also trickle down the enemy's armor, and here is how we're gonna do that. In the game, there is a special mod called Amalgam Argonac Metal Auger. This mod has a second special effect, and that is that if you have the Argonac weapon equipped with this mod on it, then any dagger type weapon that you wield will reduce enemy armor by 6 armor points per hit that you deal with the dagger. Now, first of all, you might be wondering, what is 6 armor? Is that a lot? Is that nothing? What are we talking about here? And at first glance, 6 armor is really not a lot. The maximum amount of armor points that any enemy could have in this game would be 2,700, which kind of means it would take an eternity to trickle that down with just 6 per hit. But what the game doesn't tell you is that this armor reduction of 6 points per hit does in fact not apply to the actual armor points that the enemy has, but to the base value of armor for that enemy type. What is the base armor value? That we can only find out in the Warframe wiki, where we open up the page of the enemy, set their level slider to the minimum, and then the armor displayed right here is the base armor value. So, in other words, while a Steel Path Grineer Lancer at level 100+ will definitely have the maximum of 2,700 armor, for the armor reduction calculation with the dagger, it's like that Lancer only has 200 armor, or in other words, 34 dagger hits would be enough to completely armor strip them. Now, 34 hits, that is still quite a lot, but don't worry, as we'll talk about the builds here in a second, you will see that it's actually pretty easy to achieve. However, one thing I wanted to mention before that is that all the same things that I already mentioned with the shield leeching also apply to the armor stripping, meaning that also here, the damage ticks over time from all your gas clouds are also considered armor reducing dagger hits. However, there's one caveat to keep in mind, and that is that those gas clouds only count as armor stripping gas clouds as long as the enemy that they were spawned on is still alive. So just to make an example here, if I trigger a lot of gas clouds in the simulacrum, then kill all the enemies that they came from and spawn in new ones, then those new enemies will still take damage from the gas clouds, but those gas clouds are no longer going to be able to reduce their armor. And of course, if you want to have the mod Amalgam Argonac Metal Auger for yourself to be able to also get this armor strip, then you can obtain it from the Rapalolist fight, you know, the flying Eidolon on Jupiter. But for some reason, Amalgam mods are not tradable, so you really gotta farm it for yourself. But now that we know what makes the Rakta Dark Dagger so special and what it can do for your shields and for the enemy armor, let's now bring it all together, talking about the builds on how you want to mod this bad boy to get those absolutely crazy chain reactions out of it. And here I have 2 builds prepared for you today. The first one is a more support-focused build where we use the Rakta Dark Dagger mostly for the armor strip and for the shield refill, but not so much as our main weapon to deal damage. And then in the second build, we optimize it for more damage while scaling a little bit back on the support capabilities. Let's, at first, start out with the support build. The first and most important thing to use here would be the Melee Arcane Melee Influence. What this does is, whenever you deal an electricity status effect with your melee, you have a chance of getting the melee influence buff, which once activated makes it that whenever you hit an enemy, you spread all elemental damage types that are on your melee weapon to all the enemies in an AoE around you. This is an absolute must if you want to use the Rakta Dark Dagger to its maximum potential, because it makes that you spawn those gas clouds that we're talking about not only on the one enemy that you're attacking, but on all the enemies around you, which will then be the reason why you get so many shields back, why you strip armor in the entire room, and not only on that one enemy. And with that out of the way, we of course already know some mods that we have to use. First of all, being Voltaic Strike, adding electricity damage to the weapon, because melee influence can only be triggered by dealing electricity status effects, so we of course have to get electricity on the weapon somehow. Up next, we go with 2 more 60/60s for heat and toxin, because we also need the gas. And from that point on, we want to make sure to have as much status chance as possible, so we go with Weeping Wounds that even further increases that, as well as Galvanized Elementalist, because this one also has the ability to further enhance your status chance. Then, what is also very important would be Reach, making it so that you hit more enemies at the same time. And then for the last 2 mod slots, I went with Conditioned Overload, to get some more damage out of this weapon, and Lasting Sting, giving us a longer status duration, meaning that the gas clouds will be around for longer. So the longer the gas clouds are around, the longer you will have continuous shield regeneration. As for Tennokai, in my personal opinion, if you want to use the Rakta Dark Dagger primarily as a support weapon, like shown in this build right here, you don't really need it. I just threw on a random one for testing, but you could also just pretend that it isn't there. Now, let's take a look at the more damage-focused build, where we don't have all that much of a difference. We're still going for electricity to spread the status, but this time we're not going to go for gas, because gas kills relatively slowly over time, and when we want to deal as much damage as possible, we would rather go for blast to clear big crowds of enemies, because as you probably know, whenever you combine blast with a high status chance, high attack speed weapon, that is going to lead to a whole lot of carnage, which would lead us to this build right here. Also here, in my opinion, you don't need a Tennokai mod. However, given the fact that we're actually trying to do damage, I went for Master's Edge, but in reality, the difference wasn't all that noticeable. But now, before we wrap the video up for today, let me give you some more suggestions on nice synergies that work really well with this specific Rakta Dark Dagger combination. Starting out with the thing that helps with the one big weakness of the Dark Dagger, that being, as I also previously said, that the shield refill only works if you even have shields in the first place. And that being either the Warframe Aura mod Brief Respite, the Augur mod set, Arcane Aegis, or the Guardian mod on your Sentinel. Each and every one of these methods will result in you getting shields back. For Brief Respite and the Augur mod set, it turns energy spent on abilities into shields for you. Arcane Aegis, when triggered, gives you just 12 seconds of constant shield regeneration, and Guardian fills your shield up to max whenever it goes down to 0. All these methods are really helpful with the Rakta Dark Dagger because they give you some shields back, which means that in this moment you have shields again. That means the shield regeneration from the dagger will pick up again, so that you won't be stuck on 0 shields anymore. Up next, one thing that is extremely strong here would be any type of grouping ability, because of the fact that it would enable your gas clouds to hit multiple enemies at the same time, as well as if you use the damage build, grouping enemies up and then hitting them with blast. We all know that is extremely powerful. So, especially for Warframes like Mag, Korra, Nidus, or pretty much anyone who has some sort of grouping ability, this is very strong, but even on those frames who don't, you could always run the Nautilus Sentinel with the Cordon Precept, which will not only help you group up the enemies, but also if you use Manifold Bond, then you can have this grouping ability with Nautilus up all the time, because Manifold Bond reduces the cooldown of the grouping by 3 seconds every time you take out an enemy that has at least 3 status effects on them. And with the way that we modded the Rakta Dark Dagger, we're gonna have electricity, radiation, and then either blast or gas on those enemies, meaning every kill that we get with a Dark Dagger will automatically also reduce the cooldown on Nautilus's grouping ability. Lastly, because we have to kind of give up our primary weapon slot for the Argonac so that we can use Amalgam Argonac Metal Auger for the armor strip, that means this Argonac Rakta Dark Dagger combo is especially strong also for those weapons who have a focus on using secondary weapons, given that the secondary slot is the only one that you have free choice on. And if you now want some more suggestions on broken strong melees in Warframe, then don't miss this video right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostlinux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lycon Shepherd, Ondakanio2, Pepperwolf, StreamJudge21, Signup King 5000, Mihawk HE, Yagis, Hoke Hunter, Noob Phoenix, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.